Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Dr. Nathan Greenfield. He is a North American correspondent for University World News. He is a visiting professor at the Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute and at the Kyiv School of Economics. Welcome, Nathan, and thank you that you have found time for this interview.
Thank you very much for having me, Sergey.
We have seen the role of the universities during the last decades as the platforms which provided opportunity for free speech, demonstration, and were areas where elites have been grown. And now we see the development in the universities with all the demonstrations and protests, in particular in regarding to the Israel-Hamas war. And some start, like you, start to criticize what is happening. What is wrong here from your point of view?
Well, there are several issues happening at once. The first is that North American universities have, for the last, I'd say maybe 25 years, been going down a particular road, which is called woke in right-wing circles in the United States and sometimes in left, that has, by my point of view, has gone off the road. The efforts to correct the historical wrongs to Black Americans and Hispanic Americans and other minorities, help them into the universities, make the universities a safe space for them to be in, a welcoming space, have turned in many cases into empire building. And one of the things that has also happened is that the people involved, many of the people involved in the what's called DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs and offices have turned out to be, to my surprise and my dismay, anti-Semitic. And they have been teaching students, they have been fomenting a position where Jews in the United States are not considered a minority, rather because, like me, many Jews are Ashkenazi and therefore white. They have become the exemplars of privilege. As well, it turns out, as the poet Connor Cruz O'Brien put it, anti-Semitism sleeps lightly. I've come to the conclusion, sadly and painfully, that Americans in many respects, and American universities, and many of my people I know on the left, have this inchoate sense of anti-Semitism that has flared up after the Israel-Hamas war. Essentially, it has become an unwelcome place for Jews, as we've seen in the news. And this is extremely important, is the financing.
That is exactly what I wanted to ask, because we know that universities enjoyed, and that is the basic idea of the university, place of free discussion, free speech, free science, freedom of science, that are extremely important values in our society. That is the basics, the fundamentals of our freedom. And we used to say all the time, I think it's correct, that universities must remain a place of free discussion, of free political discussion, and of free expression of beliefs, what is right and what is wrong. And now you say that they have got some sort of hijacked by accepting a lot of money from the sources which are not transparent enough.
Well, a lot of money is, putting it mildly. It's in the tens of billions, that's with a B, dollars, and in fact in the last 3 years as much as $22 billion of what's called undocumented funds. So starting in 2019, a report was given to the Department of Education detailing billions, again, tens of billions of dollars of undocumented funds that had not been reported to the federal government through the Department of Education. The government set up a portal where universities were supposed to report these funds. It turns out that they weren't even doing it then. Billions of dollars wasn't being reported, and more so, recently the government changed the reporting requirements. So it had been the case a decade or so ago that if a university was reporting funds, they would report at least where it was going within the university. That's no longer the case. So we don't know where the money is going, and we have situations, for example, if I might just give a couple of numbers. In the last 3 years, Carnegie Mellon has received $1.4 billion, Cornell $1.2 billion, Harvard $894 million. these are huge amounts. Now, in the case of Cornell, there is the fact that it is running Qatar gave it money to establish the Wheel Cornell Medical Center at University City in Doha. And a good deal of the money, of course, has gone there. I mean, they built a campus.
But that is not a crime. Like, if you get like money for funding like some medical center in another country, another side of the world, you don't have obviously from your pocket money to do this investment. It doesn't sound like bad for me.
Well, the issue is it's not a crime and it's not illegal, although there are questions about not reporting it completely. The issue is influence. If you are a university, let's say, Acme University, and you get a check for 1.2 billion to do whatever it is, and good work setting up a medical school, you don't need to be influenced by the donor country, Qatar being an authoritarian state, when certain things come up. For example, anti-Semitism on the campus of Cornell in Ithaca, New York. You don't have to have anyone from Qatar call you up and say, allow the Students for Justice for Palestine to protest, allow this group, welcome that group. You've got a $1.2 billion check sitting on your desk. And, money speaks, and money speaks very loudly. So I'm not. All this research comes from the Network Contagion Research Institute, which is housed at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Neither they nor I am claiming collusion in any sort of legal sense. What we're pointing at is that these are huge amounts of money that have gone unreported. And that only now is the government beginning to require correct reporting. My article, when it came out, triggered a correction by the government because it had stopped listing the donors, just the amounts the university got in a couple of cases. But we still don't know where it's going. What we do know from the other research by the NCRI is that universities that accept undocumented funds are more likely to have anti-Semitic activity on them.
That is what is scary. But before we go in further into details of how much this money is transparent and to what activities this money lead, don't forget to like this channel, to share, to subscribe. Don't forget to comment under this video if you have any ideas and your thoughts or your experience with the topic. And we are continuing with Dr. Nathan Greenfield, who is a North American correspondent for University World News and who is a visiting professor for the Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute and at the Kyiv School of Economics. Dr. Greenfield, when we talk about this undocumented money, as you say, what is the amount of this money compared to the overall income of the universities, and how much of this money is undocumented?
Well, in terms of the overall income, it's a significant amount. Of course, it changes from university to university. Harvard does have an endowment of $50 billion. So from its endowment alone, although they lost $1 billion a couple of weeks ago, from its endowment alone, of course, it has a huge income. But the American universities, and for that matter, Canadian universities and colleges, are in a weird position. They are all they're chartered by, in this case of the United States, by state governments. They do receive, of course, federal funds through various programs, including direct grants to students, what they're called Pell Grants, for the poorest of students, and National Merit Scholars for the best and the brightest students, and all kinds of other programs. But American universities are underfunded. State university systems are underfunded. So about 20 years ago, in both Canada and the U.S., colleges and universities were told, go forth and find money on your own. And they've done a wonderful job of it. Harvard has a brand. It has sold it overseas. Cornell has a brand. It has sold it overseas. But when you're selling your brand, in some cases, especially when dealing with authoritarian governments, you are also selling your soul, because you now have a stake in what they think of you, other than what you might have wondered about previously. In other words, the government of Qatar has the power to take away that university. from Cornell. And all of the efforts that Cornell has put into that university would go for naught. So you have a situation where the influence, a bit of back scratching, as we say in English, here and there, lessens the autonomy of the university. Add into that the university presidents for the last 30 years are basically involved in fundraising. They're not academic leaders as they were when I was a kid. Just turned 65, so that's a long time ago. But so their job is to go raise money and be seen to be raising money so they can raise more money. The result of that is that you have a stake not just in the campus in Qatar, to stay with this example, showing what you can do as Cornell, but that then leads to more contracts elsewhere.
But do the deans of the universities understand what danger it is? I understand their interest, of course. If you got cut from the state financing and you need to expand, you need to run some research programs, you need to have students, you go abroad, you go where you have money. And you have money like in autocracies where the decisions are being taken by one person and very quickly, and then you get the check. But do the deans understand the level of dependency they voluntarily jump in by accepting this money?
Well, I have a little bit of personal experience with this. I was a professor at Algonquin College in Ottawa, Ontario. It's a technical college for 30 years. In the last 5 or 6 years that I was a professor there, we opened up a campus in Jazan, Saudi Arabia, and to teach heating, ventilation, and refrigeration, what's called HVAC, other technical subjects as well, nursing, and a few others. However, because it was in Saudi Arabia, of course, we needed to have two campuses, one male and one female, which immediately violated the Ontario Human Rights Code. But we went ahead and did it anyway. Then, when the campus was set up, the male campus, I went to the college president in great anger, and I said to him, whom had known him for quite a while, I said, "You have opened a campus that I cannot go to as the senior English professor in this college and the only one with a PhD. I cannot go to it." And he said, "Why?" I said, "I'm a Jew." And he said, "So?" I said, "It's Saudi Arabia. It's a death sentence." And he looked at me and says, "Really?" I said, "You've also opened a campus that the two professors who are beneath me in seniority can't go to because they're evangelical Christians." And he said, "So?" And I said, "They cannot travel without their Bible. To bring a Bible into Saudi Arabia is another death sentence." So he said, "I don't believe you." So I had the immigration documents with me, and I threw them down on his desk, of course I had highlighted them. And he's looking at me saying, "We never knew this. No one ever told us." So we had a meeting with him, another senior administrator, one of these other two professors, myself, and a couple of board members. And I was just furious. I said, "Do you realize what you've done?" So we also had a campus at the time in India. And they said, "Well, if you want to do a year away, we'll send you to India." I said, "That isn't the point. I don't want to do a year away. The point is I cannot go to a campus of my own college in violation of the Ontario Human Rights Code and any idea of decency." So I provided this group with a bunch of readings, and we met again, and they were just shocked. And I said, now the upshot of the matter is kind of humorous. In the end, we were going to test it. They were going to appoint me, but then COVID intervened. But then Algonquin had to pull out of the campus. My college managed to lose $6 million in Saudi Arabia. In a country awash with money, they managed to lose. So it's a small example, and it's a small college in Canada. Well, it's not that, it's about 20,000 students. But it's an example of that. I don't believe in many cases that the executive suite, has a complete understanding of whom they're playing with. What game is being played. I'll give you another example also here in Ottawa. Towards the end of my wife's career, and she was the director of payroll at Ottawa U. At that point, they were setting up a medical school in Shanghai. It was, I mean, good on the Chinese. They wanted a medical school to focus on family medicine, which is an area that's completely underdeveloped in China. And everybody was, very excited about Chinese money and being, opportunities and this and that. And my wife kept asking, but what is in it for us? What are we getting out of this? And everybody kept saying, well, it's Chinese money, but what are we getting out of this? It has come out later at about the time where the whole issue about the Confucian schools, which we discussed a couple of days ago, came out, that what the Chinese have done in Canada is they have established joint programs, not through the Confucian schools, but universities, across Canada. So as you hopscotch across the 17 universities in Canada, you see a surprising number of joint programs, things like that, with the Chinese government, or entities of the Chinese government. So they have their people spread across the country. And in the case of Ottawa, which is the capital, it's a very convenient place to meet and greet important people, be them in the government or people dealing with the government. So what we have, I think what we are looking at here is a naivety of academics who simply don't have the background in international relations and don't have the background, to be perfectly blunt, in the military realities of what China has become and what its ambitions are. An article I wrote a couple of months ago on security at Canadian universities in relation to high tech in China. Many of the people I interviewed said that people just don't understand what the Chinese can do with joint projects, dual use technologies, that sort of thing. So, I mean, that's an example in that area, but I think we're looking at much the same in terms of policy development, the influence of authoritarian governments into our North American universities. And beyond the authoritarian governments, we have, if we're looking simply at money from the Middle East, again, billions and billions of dollars, some of that is being funneled through other organizations into organizations like American Muslims for Palestine, which funds the Students for Justice for Palestine, which is active on American campuses, fomenting beyond civil disobedience, threats to Jews, beating up of Jews in the last number of weeks or months now since the attack on the 7th of October.
We will definitely go further to this topic. Before we do this, don't forget to like this channel, to share, to subscribe, leave your comments under this video. And we are continuing with our discussion with Dr. Nathan Greenfield, who is a professor from Canada and who is working extensively on international cooperation. He's visiting professor at the Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, Sikorsky Institute, and at the Kyiv School of Economics. You have already mentioned the Confucius centers, and we have in Germany, for example, the situation when exactly as in the States, the state cut financing of universities. They wanted, of course, the universities to expand and to make more China research. Then Chinese appeared. They opened these the centers, Confucius centers. They even funded tenures for professors. They brought literature. They co-funded exchange for students. They brought their own students, and everyone was happy until the moment they realized that no professor can publish anything on the Uyghurs or on the Tibet issue, because in this case the tenure will be recalled and the finance will be cut. So the professors started to censor themselves without waiting for the bad consequences. So my question for you, Dr. Greenfield, is do we have any statistic data proving that agenda of the universities which have got funding has changed during the last couple of decades?
I don't know that we have statistical data on the agenda, but we have an awful lot of legal and anecdotal evidence. And by legal, I mean looking at in the case where Chinese professors have been charged and tried in states. In Canada, there has been, as in Australia, the government, the equivalent of the CIA in both countries, issued guidance to universities on being careful about certain kinds of research that could be dual use. The dual use, for example, would be a metallurgist doing research into aluminum, let's say, and you're trying to create a thinner but stronger aluminum to be used in any number of applications, such as an aircraft, which is very good for saving fuel, but also very good for fighter aircraft. So that would be a dual-use technology, and that's an example of that. Actually, from my research when I did that other article, so you have there are lots of examples of this. A lot of this is getting hard data on on all the statistics would be hard. Some of it is classified. So we don't have access to that. One of the issues that came up when I did the article on again the security in Canadian universities and specifically China is that most professors, quite rightly so, I was a professor, don't know a damn thing about security. You go into being a metallurgist because you're interested in metallurgy, not because you're interested in the international relations.
Espionage.
You're interested in security, and suddenly, people are dangling money in front of you, and you can go to Shanghai and do research, and you come back, and they come here, and after 5 or 10 years, you count these people as friends. We're talking about human beings interacting, and then suddenly your research is being nudged in a certain way, or you yourself are nudging it because you say, oh, that's an interesting problem over there. So it doesn't even have to be the kind of thing that we see, in spy movies, where someone pulls a gun to your head. You say, oh, that is an interesting problem. I wonder what happens if we do X to Y, and you're suddenly doing research that they want as opposed to you might have otherwise.
And you suddenly do it on a campus which is located in Shanghai because your university has opened its campus recently, and you have all the new labor equipment and all the assistants, and you get like a supplement for your salary if you go abroad. And you always wanted to work abroad. Why not? Indeed, that is a problem. But we have talked also recently about the discrepancy between the top legal universities and the second-grade universities. As the top-grade universities, because they have names, as you have mentioned before, they got all the finance because they can sell their brand, but the second-grade universities like Second Liga do not. Do we have any difference in political approach in these universities?
Well, it looks like we do. The NCRI has done some fascinating research on that, on an article on the impact specifically on the impact of undocumented funds on anti-Semitism. They showed that at those schools that accepted undocumented funds, and that would be the elites because they're the ones getting those funds, were, for example, the student was 15% more likely to hear on that campus, Israel has no right to exist. 15% is a lot. The researchers found campus anti-Semitic activity, I'm quoting now obviously, was correlated to the use of Twitter hashtag at significant levels, but the effect and size were greater in schools that received undocumented funds. The institutions that accepted money from Middle East donors had on average significantly more anti-Semitic incidents than those institutions that did not. And what they did was they took a map of the United States and they used 3 different databases, an FBI database as well as others, on hate crimes and anti-Semitic activity, and they plotted them and you could see that, there were a lot around, believe it or not, New York, even though New York has a huge Jewish population because of the big universities. There were a lot around Madison, Wisconsin, because of the big university, around Berkeley, because of the big. But if you looked at the center of the country, the midsection, there weren't many at all. And so, what 2 things is there are fewer Jews, what we must take into account. But the fact is that the second tier, the secondary universities. So, for example, we're not seeing this kind of activity. To stay with the example we're looking at recently of University of Pennsylvania, the president had to resign, President McGill, after her awful presentation in Congress a few weeks ago. So we know of quite a few Students for Justice Palestine protests at Penn. Some turned violent or at least threatening. Pennsylvania also runs another state university, as does every state. So there's the flagship, but there's also, so it's University of Pennsylvania is the flagship, but then there's State University of Pennsylvania and there were 8 of them. One of them is a wonderfully named Transylvania. State University of Pennsylvania at Transylvania. I spoke to a union leader at one of them, Westchester, Pennsylvania, and he knows the union leaders at all of them, and he said, I have not heard a peep. I have not heard any of this from what we call the second tier universities. And he says, I know union leaders around the country, and I asked before we spoke, none of this is occurring at the second, well, very little is occurring at the secondary tier universities, which do most of the education. The Ivies, that's at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the Ivies Plus, which would include Stanford, University of Wisconsin at Madison, Texas A&M, those account for about 150,000 students. Some counts would be 250,000 if you use the part-timers, say 250,000. There were 11 million college students in the United States. So the heavy lifting is not being done by the name brands. They are elites, like Hermes or BMW. They don't sell the most cars or handbags. They sell expensive ones. The ones that do the heavy lifting, the commuter schools, those schools are not seeing this. As this professor, who happens to be a Marxist of the old school, put it, my students don't have the leisure to protest. They take class, they have to go home to work a job, and then go take care of the kids. So
that is the key issue. Do I understand it correctly? That you need to have like different factors to let these anti-Semitic sparks transform into a fire, right? And you need all of them come together.
Yes, you do. And we do know that while the attack in by Hamas was still going on, Students for Justice in Palestine was issuing emails and putting on their websites days of action to be held 2 days from now or whatever. Perfectly printed, no grammar mistake. I was an English professor for 30 years. I know undergraduates make mistakes when they write. None of these had mistakes. They were all ready to go, professionally done, professionally written, professionally designed, ready to go while the killing was still going on in Israel. So the spark was, for the protests, was not, and then the anti-Semitic outbreaks that followed, was not Israel's response to Hamas. Rather, it was ready to go while they were still killing and raping in Israel. And they were funded, in large measure, by organizations which get funds from overseas.
That is a very scary perspective. And what I wanted to ask you in these details, you have seen like there are networks of students who are doing this political work and mobilizing the students, but also the students, they need to have opportunity to gather together and to be already formed into some networks, right?
Right. And now the networks are easy to form now with the internet. You know, we know that from the incel groups and people who like pictures of cats on Twitter. But we also, the residential colleges and universities, so it's a captive audience. You live on campus, or in the case of, let's say, Columbia, right off campus in the Morningside Heights area of New York. If you're a foreign student or international student funded by, some students are funded by an organization called the State of Palestine. And you don't have to have an on-campus job or an off-campus job. So you're there, you're easy to get to. It's easy to gather at the quad or in front of the library or wherever the demonstration is called for. You have the funds to go buy Palestinian flags, which suddenly appear. We used to joke about this when there were protests on the so-called Arab Street. Suddenly they had, after the cartoons in Denmark, suddenly there were flags of Denmark being burned all over in a number of cities in the Muslim world. Where the hell did they get the flags? I wouldn't be able to get a Denmark flag in Ottawa without looking long and hard, I'm sure. But so everything was ready to go, and they didn't need Israel's absolutely justifiable and a counterattack to be the spark, they were ready to go. They were calling for the demonstrations long before the Israeli army had taken control of the situation in Israel. It seems that this was organized. Now, it doesn't take a lot of organization to do this now with the internet. Everybody has a listserv of, on our computers. We can send an email to everyone we know, as easily as we can send it to our best friend. So it's easy to do. The residential colleges make it easier to do because people they have the time if they are funded from overseas. They don't have to be working a job. So that's one of the, so to flip that around, it's one of the reasons why you're not seeing it at the second tier schools, because those three things aren't generally in play. Even those schools that are residential at the second tier, they don't have the other two things.
What is the role of exchange students in this situation? We know that the donors who fund universities, especially those from the countries like Qatar or China, they love to bind their donation campaigns with some amount of students from their countries, which is absolutely legal. Of course, they want that the knowledge from the universities will be transformed to their countries, so they want to have like a certain quotas for their students to go to these elite universities and come back as the future elite. But is there any political influence in that?
I would think so again, because if you're going to have 50 students from the United Arab Emirates, you check off on your balance sheet. It's the international student rate, and you have that money, is secured. This was given away actually by the president of Cooper Union University in New York, which is one of America's best technical universities. Not as famous as MIT. And it's in Lower Manhattan in the East Village. And when those 4 Jewish students had to take shelter in the library, the next day or the day after, the president, who was a female, I don't remember her name, said that she was not going to take action against the students who were bashing on the door because she was worried about their immigration status. If they were suspended, international students would be kicked out. But the only thing that you could have really been worried about was the international fees and the reputation that Cooper Union has to recruit at whatever countries these international students came from. So her concern was not that they might, this 20-year-old girl or 21-year-old guy, life would be ruined because they're being hustled onto a plane at JFK and sent back to wherever they come from, but rather, when she said their immigration status, everybody who knows the system knows it's the international fees and the school's reputation. I should add I have a bit of connection to Cooper Union. My grandfather was the first Jewish graduate of Cooper Union in the 1930s.
Yeah, but that is exactly what we started to talk about. The deep economic dependency of the universities forced them to abandon or to partly abandon or to close their eyes on the academic freedoms and on the basic rules of democracy, law and human rights, and that is scary. But what can be done here? Isn't it going too far when the universities get that much money? It is clear no state in the world will provide a university with $1 billion donation just to compensate the influence from China or Qatar or Saudi Arabia.
That's a $64,000 question, to stay with the financial theme. I don't have an answer to that. I think that the Congress is going to be investigating this in the new year. and maybe we'll learn more from that. I think that transparency will help if we know where the money is going. So, for example, President McGill of Harvard was asked by Representative Stefanik, Republican of upstate New York, are you aware that the Mideast Studies Department got 1.5 billion from Mideast countries? And her response, President Gay's response, was that, well, that's the number you have. I don't know the number. I simply do not believe that going into this hearing, I do not believe that, given how well they were, how robotic their answers were, indicating how much they were coached, that she did not have that number on a piece of paper in front of her or in her head. In fact, it's more than 1.5 billion is suspected to be over the last 3 years. That's a lot of money for a department, any department. So you have a situation where transparency will help if we can track the money into in the university and then faculty, school, department. But we almost need to know, not almost, we need to know where it's going within the department. I mean, I never thought I'd come to a position where I would think Congress would have the moral authority, the legal authority it always have, but the moral authority to start looking at the projects professors are undertaking with money from outside the country. But I think it is a slippery slope to go down that road, because legislators are not experts in fields, and they'll say things for clips on TV and to fundraise off of and all of that. But academia has put itself in this situation where the only force that I can think of to be able to drill down is Congress, and that's not a good answer. And especially a Congress, Republican House of Representatives, with the Republicans as they are today, anti-science, anti-intellectual, and anti any number of things. But I can't think of another organization. State governments could do it. They might be even worse than Congress.
Oh, that is a really scary perspective which you have pictured. And of course, as the situation went so far that only state interference into academic freedoms, after all, may change the situation. It is already must be seen as a very dangerous development. And of course, independence of university must be protected. But at the same time, we need to think about security and safety of our democracy against hostile influence.
Yeah.
That was Dr.
Can I say one more thing? Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you have to protect academic freedoms and free expression and free inquiry of ideas you may hate. But the situation of the lack of transparency as to unless universities simply open their books to the public and say, this is where the money is going, this is what this investigation does, and bring it down to that level, they have given the right wing of the American politics a surely politically legitimate claim for strong oversight. And it's not something I say at all happily, but they have been too secretive with people that they should never have been playing footsie with in the first place.
Thank you. That was Dr. Nathan Greenfield. He's a North American correspondent for University World News. He's also a visiting professor for the Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute and for the Kyiv School of Economics. We have talked about the hidden influence of foreign money in the American universities, how much of hostile ideology this money can bring, how much of hostile influence, and how can we protect our freedoms against such influence. Thank you so much, Dr. Greenfield.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Take care.